Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Today is September 19th, 2016, and this is Veterans Voices, a monthly talk show focusing on your issues, veterans issues. I'm Nathan Johnson, the Contra Costa County Veteran Service Officer, and I'm host of Veterans Voices. Tonight's a very special night. We have a great show for you tonight. We're revisiting the topic that is hard to talk about, but very necessary to discuss. Tonight, we're going to talk about suicide. And we want to talk about preventing suicide. You've heard the statistics, and they are alarming. Over 20 veterans take their own life every day. That's almost one life per hour. And one life lost is one too many. Tonight, we'll talk about this topic. We want you to talk about it. We want you to call in, chat, email, and we'll try our best to offer tools and resources to help you identify when someone needs help and how to find them help. Our goal for this show is to reduce the fear and discomfort people have when they think a loved one is actively suicidal. If you're watching this show and you're in crisis, or if you know someone who is, we want you to call the VA's Veteran Crisis Line on your screen right now. We will be running this number throughout tonight's show. And if you're in crisis, or if you have questions, or you'd like to share your thoughts, reach out to us tonight by phone, email, anonymous chat, or send a message through social media. This is a very important topic. We can't have the discussion alone up here on stage. We want your input. We'll be taking your calls for the next hour. I'd now like to welcome Josh Stanley. Welcome back to the show, Josh.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Gordon Doughty. Dowdy, yep. Thanks, Gordon. And reintroduce Dr. Shauna Springer. Thanks for coming back, Shauna.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Josh, just a little bit. You've been on the show, but it's been a couple years. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Well, I'm a Bay Area native from Richmond, born and raised. Went in the Army right after high school for 4 years. Did a tour in Iraq and a tour in Afghanistan. I got back and had a lot of trouble adjusting, to be honest, and attempted to take my own life. But by the grace of God and my loving family, I made it. Then I started attending Diablo Valley College, transferred to Stanford University a few years ago, and now I'm going into my senior year. And it's just great to be alive.
Congratulations, man. It's good to see you again. Glad to have you alive. It's been a couple of years since you were on the show. And tonight we had you back, not to really tell that story necessarily, but as a veteran, and especially as a combat veteran, 2 tours overseas, just to hear your perspective, your thoughts on the topic. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Shauna, you've been on, and we actually had you on recently on a suicide-related topic. We talked about the Live For box, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a licensed psychologist. I work at the VA, but I'm not here representing the VA in any official capacity or the sort of stance of the VA.
Right.
Just here as someone who really cares a lot about the veterans I'm working with and wants to really support this mission of reducing fear and discomfort that people have around approaching this topic, because it's too important not to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you. And we certainly respect your position, and I've really talked with you a lot about the topic of suicide, even before planning tonight's show, and you've given a lot of thought and consideration to how community members and how professionals can both be involved in this. So thanks for coming back on the show.
Happy to be here.
Gordon, tell us a little about, introduce yourself to our audience tonight, sir.
So I'm Gordon Doughty. I'm a board member of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But first and foremost tonight, I'm speaking as a veteran, and also as a father who lost a daughter to suicide 13 years ago. And so I'd like to intertwine those two perspectives. Right. And I just want to compliment you on as one that has lived experience, and thank you for being here. Veteran.
Well, Gordon, thank you for being here. And, I think it's great that you offer those different perspectives as a veteran, as a survivor, and as someone involved in an organization that serves. So quickly, without too much detail, tell us a little bit about the association that you're involved in, because I think it's an important resource to our audience.
Well, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is an organization that headquartered in New York, It's been around since 1987. It was founded by researchers and parents asking the same question, why? And I think that's a question I asked myself after my daughter's death, is why? And since that time, we've gone into education, advocacy, and support for survivors of suicide loss. So I'm happy to be a board member and a volunteer with them. And they helped us tremendously after my daughter's loss.
I see. So you've benefited from it directly, and now you're involved in helping others benefit as well. Well, thank you. Thanks for being here tonight. Yeah. So, you know, this is a challenge already. Where do we get started in this conversation? You know, and we were talking before the show started about just how reluctant people are to discuss suicide. The stigmas associated with it. It lacks any kind of stimulation, really. You know, I was sharing that I thought that people are much more stimulated by a car crash on the side of the freeway than they are about, you know, discussing something like someone who is thinking about hurting themselves or who has hurt themselves. So, but let's just start with that. Let's just start with the fear and the stigma. What might people be afraid of, really, when it comes to either talking about someone who is wanting to hurt themselves, or even talking about themselves and their experience as they're going through it?
Yes. Well, I'm just looking back at my life when I was in that dark time, and it's just a scary topic. And we're talking about life and death, and that always makes people feel uncomfortable. And you're getting to the very heart and soul of that person when you breach that topic. And it takes a lot of courage to be that vulnerable, to open yourself up. And I'm not naturally courageous in that sense, and many of my veteran buddies are, but it's a nut that has to be cracked.
So death is scary for people, and so talking about a family member who might be dying is scary, or for someone to admit that they're on the brink of death just might take a lot of courage to actually start that conversation. When they do start to talk about it, though, what do they feel? Does it give any kind of relief? Do they feel some confidence after, you know, the topic is raised, or is it still difficult to talk about?
You know, it's interesting. I'm thinking about what Josh was saying, and people are sometimes very intrusive in matters of life and death. They're very intrusive at times when we have combat veterans that come back into society. They ask very intrusive questions. Have you killed someone? The veterans I meet with get that question a lot. It's very invasive. And then on the life side of things, if, you know, as a mom, when I was pregnant, I had the almost universal experience of strangers coming up to me and putting their hands on my stomach. Very intrusive. There's something about the idea of ending one's own life, about taking one's own life, that brings this cloak of secrecy down around this. And one of the things that I've been thinking is you have love and you have fear. And you just have to think about the relationship you have with that person and decide which is stronger. And if love is going to be stronger than fear, then you need to move into that space. And so a way that almost works for any situation I can think of, although it's hard to give blanket guidance, is to say, you know, I'm having a difficult time trying to think about how to address this with you, but I care about you too much to not ask. Have you had thoughts of ending your life? And just acknowledge the fear and then move in.
Do you think people are concerned? Do you think they generally, because I'm thinking about those examples that you gave, which are very, very interesting. You know, in general, people are concerned about the health and welfare of women who are carrying a baby, right? Because that's the future, and you know, there's such a healthcare system built around that, right? But do you think we have that same level of care and concern about people who are considering taking their own life? Do we care about those kind of people also?
You know, I think it's a step that we need to take. As I mentioned earlier, we were talking before the show started about how freely we talk about our injuries from the shoulders down, but we never talk about those illnesses from the shoulders up. That stigma that you mentioned is there, you know, and what we don't quite understand is someone who is really suffering from depression, something like that, is in a spot. They don't want to be there, but they don't know how to get out, right? And that's where we all can jump in and help. You know, we need to take that first step when we notice that someone is in distress.
So how can we notice? How can we get a sense, a real genuine sense that someone is in distress?
Okay.
What signs might they give us?
There are some warning signs. So if we take someone who is starting to withdraw, maybe from their family unit, from their friends,
okay.
Someone who's eating either way, too much, less, not sleeping, you know, to some extreme, giving away possessions.
Let's break that down a little bit, because I think giving away, I mean, we give away things certain times of the year, typically around the holidays, birthdays. So giving away possession, might it be someone coming to you in a particular way, giving away something? Is it something very special to them, or is it just, hey, I wanted you to have this because it reminds us of this special
It's a little bit of both, but you have to look out for those things that had some meaning to the individual, and look for that. When they start giving away those things that have meaning to them, that's a big red flag. So
like an inheritance, kind of like, this is something I'm giving to you, almost like someone would write in their will, right? Like this, I want you to have this at the time of my death, yeah.
But it's a spontaneous thing that they're going through.
Got it.
You know,
Got it. So it
right
doesn't
now.
align well with the circumstances of what's going on. It might seem a little out of place then.
Out of place. So you look for those things that are out of place, and you start a conversation.
Like if someone gives you their beloved Harley, pay attention, you know.
Because
If
they're still able to ride the Harley.
able-bodied and, you know, they're
Right.
thinking about
They love this
bequesting
Harley.
it,
Yeah.
then
Got it.
that's something to pay attention to. Or even small things that have great meaning, pictures, mementos, if they're giving those away.
Right, right. And when you start to sense this and you develop a little bit of concern, but we talk about this, maybe this fear that comes from this. I mean, it might be someone who you never would imagine would even broach this topic, right? So you might even maybe doubt that this person really is going through that. So when you're feeling this fear to respond to that, or even this doubt, like, no, this person can't really be going through this type of experience. They might not be considering hurting themselves, like I'm suspecting. How do we develop the next steps of what's acceptable? Because we have kind of these social norms, right? And so we've got to kind of visit those in our head and somehow get through those to do what, Josh? What's a good thing?
Well, as far as addressing the topic with a friend or a loved one that you think may be in dire straits in that regard, I make sure it's private, that it's just one-on-one. And I use social media a lot for that, actually. With a lot of Army buddies, I've been approaching them through private messages on Facebook, like dropping a line like, hey, start off innocently enough, like, hey, how are you doing? Just wonder what you've been up to. Been thinking about you. Is everything okay? And let them know that you're there to listen, and without any judgment, because that's one big thing as far as not wanting to talk about it, is the fear of being judged, the fear of being perceived as weak, especially for a veteran who's often full of pride. Don't want to give the impression of any kind of weakness. It's like a cardinal sin, but let them know that it's okay.
You know, the
no judgment.
important thing that you said was that you reached out and you just started a casual conversation. And it can be that simple. You know, there's, oh my God, I don't want to get involved, or I don't want to ask that question, you know, and it's as easy as starting a conversation.
So what you're saying is that maybe the first comment or question out of your mouth is not, are you thinking about hurting yourself? But maybe you might ask a little more gentler or easier question first, like, how are you feeling? Or
hey, what's going
how
on?
was your day? Or what's going on? And then maybe work yourself towards a little bit more of a blunt, more specific question, like, are you thinking about killing yourself?
I think it depends on the relationship you have, which is why it's hard to kind of give general guidance. But I think it's a matter of what risk you're going to take. You know, there's the risk of kind of walking away and not saying anything. I think the bigger risk is to not address the isolation. To not address the isolation means to let that fundamental lie that happens when people get into that tunnel of chaos, people in my life are better off without me, to not let that lie stand. So if it's casual and you have that relationship with that person, like Josh is saying, just kind of work into it in whatever way feels natural, but don't let your fear stand in the way of asking the questions and going there.
Let's talk a little bit more about that mindset of people would be better off without me in a little bit here. We're going to go to a commercial break, and we have a question over Facebook, so I want to acknowledge that. Thank you. We'll come back to this question. But we'll now take a quick break for a public service announcement and just to give ourselves a little bit of break from the heaviness of the conversation, because it's very heavy. And so this video is brought to you by the Veterans Crisis Line. It's a phenomenal video. And we'll still be taking your calls and messages over Facebook, over chat, email, call in. So please don't hesitate, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Veterans Voices. We hope you enjoyed that public service announcement from the Veterans Crisis Line. Tonight our show is called Even You Can Prevent Suicide. And we're here tonight to openly discuss the issue, offer resources, and take your questions. We want you to call in now. Send us an email or a chat, something anonymous if you'd prefer. But your input, your contributions are very important to this discussion. And so we have a comment here from our Facebook page. Thank you. And it says, hello from HCMC. Don't know what that is, but maybe intentionally they don't want us to know. I might think it's even Headquarters Marine Corps for some reason, but a very necessary conversation tonight that we're having. Vets need support after going through what they have. The reality is that when any of us are in the throes of suicidal ideation, motivated to take ourselves out, very little can bring us back. Throw a rock in any direction and you will hit a veteran who is contemplating killing oneself. All of us put a mask on and we do it every single day. Any thoughts on that comment? We thank you for whoever submitted that comment. Any thoughts on that?
So much pain in that. Such a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. We can't do anything. And I guess I've seen people come through that. I have seen when people show up and they pull that person back into community. And it can start with just one relationship. You know, if you show up and somebody's feeling hopeless and you come alongside them, and I'm going to use you, Gordon, as an example, okay? We have this thing about, you know, men maybe don't touch. That's not true at all. I read a really interesting book over the weekend by Sebastian Junger called Tribe. He talks about how he was embedded in an army unit that was in a terribly war-torn area of Iraq, and how when he slept, he could reach out and touch 3 other people. They touched all the time. He said, we always felt safe because we were in a group. And so pulling people back into a sense of community and tribe starts with 2 people. You come up next to someone, and you sit right next to them, and you just lean right into them. Just lean with your weight. Nothing says, I am here with you walking through this valley, like physical touch. And I can't really do that as a therapist. We have certain, you know, boundaries in our profession, but family members and loved ones can do that. So they can come in and just lean in and just show up for people. And I think, you know, we can do something about this.
Yeah, this is almost kind of, we're surrounded and there's absolutely nothing for us to do. But you've just given us a very basic, easy thing that's, you know, not as invasive as others might think. It's just that feeling that warmth and feeling that comfort of someone else's presence. We have a call. We have Chris on the line. Chris, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Chris, welcome to Veterans Voices.
Thank you.
So, Chris, so far we've talked a little bit about just how suicide is a difficult conversation to have with someone who you might, it's even difficult actually to sense it correctly and to feel confident and to feel courageous, and then to ask someone the question about whether they're considering hurting or killing themselves. What do you have, any thoughts or comments on the topic tonight?
Wow. Well, I guess I should share the fact that I was almost one of the statistics. When I first returned from Iraq, I had acute symptoms of PTSD, and 3 months upon returning from home, I had a loaded Glock pistol in my mouth with the finger on the trigger, and I was self-medicating, and I almost became a statistic. And I think that one of the problems that we have to do as a community is overcome this stigma that getting help is a sign of weakness, or that it makes you any less of a warrior. And, you know, people often say, hey, look, when you were over there, you were brave, you were courageous for your fellow soldiers. And, you know, we need to carry that courage back with us and have the courage to seek help, and to know that there is help out there, and that it's not a sign of weakness. And I think, you know, the 22 push-up-a-day campaign, all these things going on to raise awareness about veteran suicide is great. And because I think, you know, reintegration takes the community, it takes everybody. You know, it takes families and friends and politicians. You know, it takes people to educate themselves about how big this problem is, and provide them with specific ways that they can approach the subject. You know, like you were talking about, how do you address it? How do you bring it up? You know, I think it starts with being aware of what the warning signs are, and then having some concrete, specific things that you can do to address it if you think that a veteran is in crisis.
You know, Chris, I have a question for you, and I'll ask it kind of slowly here so you can have some time to think about it. But when you say get over the stigma, or, you know, get past the stigma, you know, an image came to my mind that I haven't thought about in this topic at all. And that image that came to mind was that experience in boot camp in which some recruits, and Gordon and Josh, help me out here if you experience this, in which some recruits were experiencing an emotional crisis, and other recruits were actually placed on what they called the suicide watch. And this other recruit in this emotional crisis, their bed was in the middle of the room, and in which a Marine recruit or a soldier had to literally stand around them 24 hours a day, and that person was very much stigmatized in boot camp. This is the training. This is like the foundations of how we become soldiers and Marines. And so that's the visual that came to my mind when you said stigma. I remembered the stigma started right there, really, for me, in which that person laying in the middle of the room, they were very weak in that circumstance. Not because they were truly weak as a person, but the visual was that they were a very weak person, and we had to stand around them 24 hours a day and actually look at them. So when we talk about getting past the stigma, what might a visual be that might be something better to think of or to you know, picture in our minds, Chris, that would help us get over that stigma?
I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean by a visual?
Well, I mean, if we're going to kind of reflect back on when we learn, you know, the foundations of who we become as a soldier or a sailor or a Marine, might a visual be that that person is actually still strong, that they're still a warrior, that they're still educated, that they're still capable and employable, but yet, you know, that this emotional crisis doesn't look like someone who's vulnerable, like a person laying in the middle of a squad bay. I mean, what?
Yeah. I mean, that's an extreme example. You know, I think it really you know goes back to just the warriorhood, the brotherhood, and you know being there for each other and understand. Because I mean, combat veterans know that it's a heavy load to, you know, you're in an extreme environment constantly for an extended period of time, and even the toughest soldiers, even the most elite soldiers, are going to be affected by it. And I think it's just important that we as a community let each other know that, hey, you know, I've been there too. I've been affected by it. I've had nightmares. You know, I've had hypervigilance. I want to sit in the corner in the restaurant with my, you know, my back to the wall so I could see everybody. You know, I'm kind of on alert all the time as well. And it's really about reaching out to each other and saying, hey, dude, you're not weak. You're not. You're still a soldier. You're still strong. You're still brave. You're still, you know, you're still the guy that stands up to the bully and you're willing to go overseas and fight evil. You know, just because you've been affected by the experience, it doesn't mean you're weak.
I guess so the visual in my mind is it's not just a you thing. It's not just you in the middle of this floor on this bed. It's a we thing. Yeah. It's we are still connected. We still need each other. We are still capable. So I guess that's the visual, I guess, in my mind that would help me get past that stigma. It's kind of almost everyone in the squad bay kind of looking left and right and going, you know what, we're all going to be challenged by this. Potentially, we all could be challenged by this. If not directly what we're going through, challenged by how to help each other and what they're going through. So thanks, Chris, and feel free to stay connected to the conversation. I'm not gonna disconnect you from the call. Please stay connected. But I want to get some feedback from everyone else here on the show. Shauna.
I just wanted to say two things. I think, you know, Chris calling in and Josh being here is part of what helps break down the stigma. When you see people who walk point in brave ways and say, I felt suicidal at one time. I was in that dark tunnel. I mean, the co-developer of my project also acknowledged on the last show that he had a time of suicidal crisis. He has such an amazing future in front of him. Seeing people come through that and become successful and fulfill their potential is part of how we break that stigma. The visual I get is 3 or 4 people sitting next to each other and with their backs to each other and just having each other's backs. It is a tribal intervention that we need. It is not get thee to the doctor. The doctor is never meant to be the hero or the savior. it is a tribal intervention that we need.
Right. Well, we talked about that in a recent kind of email dialogue, and this is part of the perspective that you're offering, is that we tend to think as the psychologist as the only person who can be involved in the intervention, but yet it could start with us, the person who that veteran already is connected to, that family member, that neighbor next door, that fellow soldier, right? That new veteran that you met. It's not just the psychologist. It's not just behavioral and mental health, right? Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if we are going to feature here in a few minutes a public service announcement that you helped put together, so we'll get to watch that. And we'll list your theater project as a resource at the end of the show. So thanks so much, Chris, for being on the show tonight and contributing. And we'll hope to stay connected to you in future opportunities.
Excellent. God bless.
So we have just a few minutes, and I appreciate everyone who called in. Chris, we have a Facebook message. Our phone lines are open. Our chat line is open and running. You can send us a message through Facebook. Even if you call in, it could be confidential. It could be private. You don't have to give us your name. You could just make a comment or ask a question, and we'll respect your privacy. So we have a few more moments, and we've talked a lot about how to be involved in a role when you're right there with the person. But a lot of times in the military, when you leave and go to different parts of the United States, and you're not physically in contact, or you don't live in the same town any longer. A lot of my buddies from the Marine Corps are all over the United States. So let's talk a little bit about how you can still take a role. Josh, you mentioned social media earlier. So give us a little bit more. We have 2 minutes, but let's talk a bit more about how, although there's physical separation, what are some good ideas for staying connected on this?
Yeah, for me, and my buddies, it's two things, cell phone and Facebook. And again, start casual. I try to do buddy checks as frequently as possible.
What's a buddy check?
Just dropping a line. Usually I just say something as simple as morale check.
Morale check.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just because we're out of the service, we still got to watch each other's backs.
What are you really asking, though? I mean, that's the lingo that makes it casual and says, hey, this is coming from a buddy, right? So but what are you really saying when you're asking that question?
What I'm really saying is, even though we can't see each other physically, like all of us now, I'm still here for you. And we can talk, and we can laugh, share funny memes, and joke like we used to. Our relationship is not over.
I still care about you.
Yes.
I still think about you. You're on my mind, and in this moment and such. Yeah. And how do your buddies respond to that? I mean, do you provoke that? Do they return the favor? I mean,
thank God. And I really hammer that in with my conversations. I say, hey, I still need you, and they really appreciate that, and it gives them like a sense of ongoing purpose.
Yeah.
And usually we just start joking, and it's amazing how much a laugh can uplift you.
Yeah, right.
I think one of the things that is difficult for someone who hasn't been in the service to understand is that camaraderie. For that period of time, you are building relationships that are lasting. And that's not to downplay family relationships and friend relationships at home, but it is a special relationship that you've had to rely on each other and reach out and touch each other, And so sometimes it's difficult for those that haven't been in the service to understand that, but it's such a powerful thing. And you're a perfect example of how it can really work in a very positive way.
I want to ask a question, and we have to go to a break.
Sure.
But so I'm going to hold my question and ask follow-up to what you just said, Gordon. Thank you so much. We'll return after this brief message, and we're now featuring that public service announcement from thenextchallenge.net.
So you think you're a tough guy?
Did you know
veterans' attempted suicides and self-injuries
have quadrupled over the past 6 years.
That's right.
Quadrupled.
18 veterans
commit suicide
each day?
How are you going to adapt to the next challenge?
We are still a team.
Without any hesitation, when you're downrange, you would jump on a grenade for your battle buddy. Now that you're back home, you need to demonstrate that same selflessness if your battle buddy's depressed.
There is a time to suck it up and drive on.
And there is a time to be strong enough to know when you need help.
There is strength within vulnerability.
Everyone goes through a difficult time when they come back home.
I've been through some rough spots since I got back.
I've experienced all the symptoms that you have. I reached out for help and I got it.
And if you find yourself struggling with this next challenge,
You might have to be vulnerable and ask for support.
Have the courage to talk about what's going on inside.
seriously,
Have the courage to ask for help when you need it.
Find someone you trust enough to talk about what keeps you up at night.
it could be anyone.
Buddies from your unit.
Your family.
Your neighbor.
A private counselor or one at the VA.
Guys you served with or veterans from previous generations.
I did experience alcohol abuse and PTSD.
With the help of caring people in my community.
I got through it.
We got through it.
You can too. Don't be too proud to ask for help if you need it.
It doesn't matter when or where you served. All veterans have earned the right to receive treatment.
You are not alone.
Look out for your buddies and be aware of warning signs.
If you think a friend may be suicidal,
Encourage them to get help.
If you find yourself in crisis, find the courage and humility to reach out for help.
So tonight, welcome back. And tonight we're discussing suicide prevention. Even you can prevent suicide. That's the topic. And yes, like Smokey the Bear, we want you to understand that everyone has a role in this. It's not just a problem of the VA. It's not just something for the psychologists to solve. You can take a role in this conversation tonight. You can take a role in this issue even tomorrow. If you're watching, and if you're in some type of crisis today, right now, or if you know someone who is, call the VA's Veteran Crisis Hotline. The number's on your screen right now. And if you have any questions or you'd like to share your thoughts tonight, reach out to us by phone. The phone number's on the screen. You can email us, and you can even remain anonymous and send us a chat. So I have a question for Gordon, and we have a comment real quickly that I want to address. The comment says, I don't know if it's a question. I'll just read it. How do we come up for air when the motivation is far removed and seemingly too far gone? Sometimes the fleeting light is that breath of fresh air when you let the lights flicker out. Thank you, Zach. So let that sit in for a little bit, and we'll come back to that. But I want to ask the question too, Gordon, if you don't mind. You mentioned that the camaraderie is very, very important in the relationship between veterans, right? And
Correct.
less and less of our community is serving today. We, during past wars, had more of the community taking on enlistments and serving in our forces. But today, statistics are between 10 and 1%. So what about the community member, the civilian who didn't serve, who doesn't quite understand the depth of that camaraderie? Is it still important for them to get involved? And I asked this question offline, and you had an answer too, Josh, so feel free to jump in. But, do they feel apprehensive because they fear, oh, well, I didn't serve, so I don't have that connection like veterans do?
But they obviously have some kind of connection. And just because you didn't serve doesn't mean that you can't go in and intervene, that you can't be part of that person's life. There's not that definitive line of camaraderie of service members and then family members or old friends or those friends. When I returned from Europe, although I wasn't in combat, I still came back a couple years later, and friends were gone, family was still there, and I had to look for something myself to do to get motivated. You have no job, no money, you're living at home, you don't really want to be there, not because it's bad, but you're just not used to living at home now. And I went back to school as well, and to be around and made new friends and things like that. I didn't, I still had that camaraderie and that part with me from my military buddies, but I also wanted to reach out and get other people, and I think that it just can cross over naturally. There's not a definitive line, and I don't think anyone who is concerned about someone should say, well, I just don't understand, you know, because then you're not trying. What you need to do is to ask that question, you know.
Another way to ask the question is, do you have to be a veteran to have someone's back?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's about capacity to build trust, capacity to be a safe person. You know, part of my vision is that veterans would begin to see their VA treatment providers as people with the same heart as the medics they came to trust in the military. So I think you absolutely can get in there into that space and ask those questions.
Yeah.
What do you think, Josh?
I thank God for all of my civilian friends because they break me out of my military shell, so to speak. I was always worried when I first got out of the Army that I would only be able to relate to veterans, and I'm glad to report that's not the case anymore. I started attending school shortly after my attempt, Diablo Valley College, Community College, and I had a lot of classmates that were fascinated by the fact that I was in the military and served overseas, and they gingerly approached me, so to speak. They were cautious, walking on eggshells. They didn't want to ruffle any feathers, so to speak, but they were intellectually curious, and that started a conversation, and that conversation morphed into good friendships that give me a great perspective on things from the outside and just help me develop as a person.
Key word is friendship there.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back to the comment. We've got a couple minutes before we go to another PSA, but I want to go back to the comment because, you know, the comment was very deep and it was very, you could tell that it was very thoughtful, and someone may understand that a little bit more than someone else. So what if we're challenged to really understand where they're at? What if we're challenged to really understand what they mean by how they're expressing it? Is it okay to ask follow-up questions? Is it okay to really try to get clarity and seek clarity from that person so that we can truly understand? Do we need to understand where they're at? Do we really need to feel it in order to help them? Or do we just need to have those senses and then react and say, oh, I know what to do, call the Veterans Crisis Line? You know, is it okay to kind of stop and say, you know, what do you mean by, you know, how do we come up for air when the motivation is far removed?
I think asking for that clarification, you know, it's the key here is you've started a conversation, you know, and it should be a friendly conversation away from others, you know, if you're concerned and you want to find out. And it's okay to probe. Well, what do you mean by this? You know, to kind of get an idea of where they're coming from. You know, how far down that deep, dark hole are they, right?
Seeing the light.
And in doing so, you know, you're not the end provider for this person. You know, we call them gatekeepers. So you're the person that's going to start that conversation to establish some form of relationship with them, and you know, ask that question. If you think that they're at that critical point of taking their lives, you need to be very direct about it. But other than that, it's start that dialogue, get them thinking. You need to be a good listener, right? And ask those probing questions when there's things that you don't know.
What if they become upset? What if they react? What if we try to help them and they push back?
And that will happen.
It will?
You know, for some people, you know, it will. They think that you're encroaching on their life, what they feel.
Yeah, I was thinking about that PSA that we watched a little earlier, in which, you know, the suggestion about firearms and such, right? That might be encroaching on some things they feel very personal about, right? Hold on, you're starting now to talk about my gun privileges, and now, hold on, you're taking this into a whole different discussion. So they may, although you're trying to help them and you're trying to help them understand that that weapon might put them more at risk than it might bring safety to them. So.
But in some ways, as a friend of a veteran who has a long relationship, whether you were serving in battle or just becoming very good friends through college, you have some advantages there again too. Because I think when people know that you really love them and you have their back, they give you a lot of attributional charity is what we call it in psychology. But let's take something that people fear. What if I called the crisis line and really got, called in the forces to respond? And would they be angry because I called in the crisis line? A lot of times people, they don't express anger. They're grateful that someone cared enough about them to call in help. I think that we have an advantage, just as sort of friends and people that have a long history to move into that space.
Right. Well, we have more time to talk. We're going to break for just a moment, and I want to invite anyone in our audience who are asking these same kind of questions, or maybe there's a question or something that you're thinking about that we haven't talked about. We only have a little bit more of our show left. We've got another 10 minutes left. We'd love to hear from you. Call in, send us a chat. We've got another message here that we're going to get to as soon as we come back. And we'll be welcome to your comments or questions. Here's another video from our Vet Center program.
Life after deployment isn't always so easy.
My marriage was falling apart. I had trouble sleeping.
I was always on edge, always tense.
I felt like my kids were afraid of me.
I was drinking more every day.
Going from one prescription to the next.
I couldn't find a job.
It was hard to focus in school, let alone everyday life.
I didn't want to admit that I had some issues to deal with.
But you know what? I got sick and tired of it. Decided to get on with my life.
I found the support I needed at my local vet center.
It's a free counseling center for anyone like me who's been in a combat zone.
My family members qualify for readjustment counseling services too.
They adjust everything from PTSD and marital counseling
to military sexual trauma and bereavement therapy.
Most of the counselors and staff are veterans too. I like that.
I like that. I like that.
And you know what? It turns out I'm not the only one who's able to get some help at a local vet center.
So welcome back. That was a quick break, but we hope you enjoyed the video. This is Veterans Voices, and tonight our topic is suicide prevention. We're having an open discussion. You're invited to be a part of the discussion. You have a question, you have a comment. We've got a comment that we'll get to here. And for the next few minutes, while we wrap up, we want to hear from you. We've got several experts. We have Gordon, we have Shauna, and we have... Josh. I'm sorry, Josh. Gosh, that's going on the bloopers. We have Josh, and we have Shauna, and we have Gordon on the show, veterans and experts who want to hear from you. If you're in a crisis or you know someone who is, call the VA's Veteran Crisis Line on your screen. So the comment that we have here from HCMC, who apparently is Ho Chi Minh City, the focus should be on prevention. That starts with looking at U.S. foreign policy. The connection is clear. The troops fight in our name, so we are connected to them from the start. Why don't you talk about the root causes of veteran suicides? Okay, let's talk about it. And Josh, that's going on the bloopers, man. Let's talk about the root causes. Let's talk about if there is such, specifics. If we're looking at everything we've talked about so far, what does begin to take someone to a point where they're thinking about taking their own life?
In my case, it was me isolating myself, sticking to a corner of the house with a bottle of whiskey, and just constantly feeding on this lie I was telling myself that I was a failure in life and to my buddies overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, I was just believing a lie that my own mind fabricated somehow.
What makes us feel like a failure? I mean, since it's not just a you thing, and I don't want to ask what made you feel like a failure. When do we begin to feel like a failure, Josh?
Well, for us, it's when us, as in my buddies and I, as casualties. Mm-hmm. A lot of survivor's guilt, mm-hmm. Telling ourselves that we could have done something to have stopped it, but there really is no answer to that. Like, we did what we could, and that's all that can be said. And it's time to just accept the wound and let it heal and move on as best as we can together.
War's chaotic, right?
By nature, yes.
Yeah, and oftentimes we're in very little control, if none at all, in regards to the circumstances. I've also learned, too, in talking to people who have never been in combat, that oftentimes they feel guilty about having never been.
Absolutely.
And as if they really had a choice, because oftentimes when I talk to that person, I've yet to meet someone who served in the military who specifically got to choose where they wanted to go or what they wanted to do, other than, writing down a few duty stations when you re-up for another 4 years. That's about as close as it gets. But, having gone into combat and your role in combat, whether you actually see any action or not, is completely, it's chaotic. It's not a decision that someone ever gets to make, I feel. Right?
Feeling, if I could add on to your feeling of failure, as a non-combat veteran, I felt I could not call myself a veteran for 45 years after I got out. It took me 45 years before I could call myself a veteran. And it was that strong...
honorably on active duty, but yet...
Yeah, that strong feeling that I didn't serve in combat. I was in Germany. Most of my friends were in Vietnam, and a lot of them didn't come back. And there was a lot of guilt about that. But as you mentioned, I went where my orders sent me.
You did your job.
And I did my job. But that wasn't quite enough. It's taken a while, and it's actually taken some of my veteran friends who have served in combat to convince me that I am a veteran.
Don't mean to interrupt, but we have a phone call.
Sure.
I don't know who we have yet. Our production team's working on it. So I appreciate the comment from Ho Chi Minh City. I want to acknowledge that because you've been very engaged in the conversation tonight. So thank you, and we're respecting your confidentiality, obviously, which we can do. So we have a caller on the line. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you're from, but thank you for joining us. And maybe you want to remain confidential, and we respect that. So how can we help you tonight?
Nothing. My buddy Ryan had actually wanted me to kind of call in and just say, I think you guys are talking about member experiences and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Your buddy Ryan told you to call in, so to share us a little bit. Are you a veteran yourself?
I am. I'm a Marine, or I'm a former Marine, and I guess I mean you guys are talking about like veteran suicide and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're talking about suicide prevention tonight. Absolutely. Give us your thoughts on the topic. We have about a minute left.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had one of my Marines probably kill himself probably maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, and I hadn't talked to him in about, I don't know, it's probably been about 6 or 7 years, something like that. And when I found out about it, at first it didn't really, because I've had other people kill themselves, like other Marines that I've known that have killed themselves. But this one really probably hit the hardest, just because he was the one dude that you would have never really expected that. He's a nice Marine. Like and I've said this before, he had no business being a Marine. He was super smart, like the sweetest guy I'll ever meet. Not like a typical Marine, just like aggressive and kind of an ass. I mean, Marines are cool and all, but we can have that kind of mentality, and he wasn't really like that. So when he killed himself, at first it bothered me, but afterwards, like a day later, I was driving to work. I pulled in the parking garage, and as I was about to get out, I just broke down. Like I sat in my car crying for, I want to say for at least a good hour, just bawling. Like I couldn't stop it. I don't know, maybe I had just kind of like held it in for a little bit or whatever, but like I couldn't stop. So I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we've unfortunately run out of time, but I really want to let you know we were listening. Everyone was listening tonight, and I heard a lot of shock and awe from that, right? I heard a lot of just almost kind of normalization, like, oh man, it's just happened so much, and so I don't have any response to it. But then suddenly the shock and the awe of this very good friend of yours killing himself, and just how that affected you emotionally. And so thank you so much. I mean, that took a lot of courage to just call into the show. That's not easy to do. And for sharing that story, we really appreciate that. Thank you. And we hope you're doing well tonight. And connect with us. You know, if you're not, we really would like to help any veteran, such as our caller, or anyone else in our audience who is experiencing something just like this gentleman who called in is. We discuss many resources and websites on the show tonight, which are also listed on our homepage. Something else for you to check out. The local chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention can be found at afsp.org/SF Bay Area. It's a great organization. Again, Gordon, one of our guests tonight, is involved in it. The Next Challenge can be found at thenextchallenge.net, where you'll find resources and some great video content like the one we showed you tonight. Chris Lavero, who called in earlier, he's involved in warriorsforpeacetheater.com. warriorsforpeacetheater.com. VeteransCrisisLine.net has many resources for veterans and their families. They can also be reached by their toll-free number. You can even chat with them. I've called the number. I've chatted with them. It's a real thing. People answer the line. They're very professional. We have some upcoming events for veterans in our community. More information can be found on our website, but here's a few for you. If you have an upcoming veteran event, mention it to us and we'll feature it on the show as well. California Run for the Fallen will be on September 23rd through the 25th. Go to carunforthefallen.org for more information. Contra Costa Blue Star Moms Chapter 20 brings the Red, White, and Brew on September 24th at 1 p.m. For tickets or info, send a message to the email on your screen now. And the Swim for Alcatraz, Take the Rock, will be happening on September 25th in the San Francisco Bay. Yes, they're going to swim 1.25 miles from Alcatraz. You can learn more at taketherock.com. Shark bait. On November 8th at 11 a.m., the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors will be hosting a Veterans Day recognition at 651 Pine Street in Martinez. This is open to the public. Please join us. The Veterans Service Office and the Concord Vet Center will be hosting the 4th annual Veterans Day softball tournament on Friday, November 11th. That's Veterans Day at 11 a.m. Call Maurice Delmer, 925-680-4526 for more information. I want to remind our viewers to please start thinking about your questions and discussion topics for our expert panel on November 21st. The topic will be general. There is no specific theme or specific message. We want to hear from you on any questions you have about VA benefits, on any thoughts that you have about veterans or about their family members. What wife does the spouse play in this picture? If you're a military spouse, we'd love to hear questions and get feedback from you on this special episode. Thank you to all of our guests, Josh, Shauna, Gordon, thank you for being here tonight. Exceptional show. Appreciate all that you do every day. This is Veterans Voices, wishing you all a good evening, and thank you for serving.